Hi there, I'm back for Altenew and it's time for another take two with Therese, and I've got two cards to share that look very similar but they're created just a little bit differently. So I want to create a couple of watercolor background panels. Now this first one that I'm making is using some Bristol Smooth cardstock and I'm using the smooshing technique. So I'm adding my ink directly to the craft mat, giving it a spritz with some water, picking it up with some acetate and then sort of smooshing it onto the cardstock. I mostly dried in between layers because I didn't want the inks to get muddy as they would if they were wet and were sort of combining with each other. I initially was thinking of real kind of pastel-y colours, and as usual it got brighter and brighter. It didn't go overly bright, but still a lot brighter than I originally intended. So I do have a heat tool that has dual settings, so I can actually heat the cardstock with a lower, it's like it has a lower temp, I don't know if it has a lower temperature, but it definitely has a lower fan, so it doesn't tend to warp the cardstock as much. But of course, with all these different layers of colour, I did need to actually straighten out my cardstock, and I did that simply by running that through my die cutting machine, wrapped up in some, I just added a few layers of shims of cardstock to that, and that comes out really quite flat in the end. So what I'm doing here is I want to actually stamp my image so it looks like it's coming off the panel and onto the front of the card. So just to work out my placement, I've actually sat the card base itself within my MISTI and stamping, this is the Precious Peony, and I'm using some obsidian black ink and stamping it directly onto the front of my card. Then I'm going to take my panel of watercolour, which I have cut down a little bit. I didn't think ahead well enough here, but I'll show you a technique to make this a little bit easier on the next card. And I'm actually going to stamp the image one more time in the same obsidian black ink. And this ink is brilliant, like it just stamps like a dream on, even on the Bristol Smooth. I don't have a problem with any coverage at all. So this is how I kind of worked out how to center my panel. I wanted to make sure that my flower was in the same spot, so I just held it over top of the actual image and then cut it down. And then I added a sentiment from the Delicate Flower Bed stamp set just at the top with some more black ink, and popped up the panel on some foam, fun foam, and added some score tape to hold that in place. So like I said, a little bit brighter than I probably first intended. And both cards today I did add some jewels to the front. So my second card, I'm a little bit more organised, I know what I'm doing. This time I'm going to be using my stamps to recreate the watercolour look. So I've got the beautiful new inks from the Tranquility set, as well as Sea Glass, which is from the Cool Summer Night stamps ink set. And I'm just randomly grabbing some of the stamps. I showed you the ones I had just sort of picked out of my stash. It's the Coffee with a Splash, watercolor frames, and the splash of color. I did also grab out the Stone Mosaic set, but I didn't use that to stamp up my layers. And this time what I've done is I've cut my panel to exactly the same size as the front of my card. That's going to make it so much easier for me to do this double layering technique. I've grabbed the Wallpaper Art stamp set and I'm using my obsidian black ink again, and this time I'm going to have to create my own bouquet. The other one was one stamp, so that made it particularly easy, but this is not a hard stamp to create a bouquet with because the flowers and the leaves are quite big. So have you seen what I've done here? Because I've got the same size panel as the front of my card, I can just leave my stamps in place within the MISTI, and then I know they're going to be stamping in the same spot. So like I said, I've got the card base in there. It's annoying me because it keeps popping up. It's the 110 pound weight, but I'll fix that in a moment as well. So, and I do want to create a mask because I am making that bouquet, so I'm just stamping off the excess ink on a post-it note here. And then I did fussy cut that out just slightly inside the black line, so that when I stamp to the edge, it'll actually stamp right to the edge of the image for my second flower. And I did that on both the card front. Every image that I stamp here, I'm going to do both on the card front and on this watercolor panel. Well, watercolor look panel. So if you're not really keen on using watercolors, this is a really great way to get the watercolor look, but you're still in control. See, I told you, the card was annoying me. I had to add some adhesive in place to keep it shut while I was finishing off my stamping. I added one of the leaf images from the set to both as well, but I actually didn't need it on the front of the card itself because my watercolor, I say that in inverted commas, the leaves don't show on the card front itself. So my sentiment comes from the stone mosaic set. This has some really sweet sentiments in it, and I just wanted something a little bit small, so I white heat embossed that on some jet black cardstock and then cut that down. And to work out where the center of my card was, I just made some pencil marks. If you've got a die, like a rectangle die, you could easily die cut it out. That would be easier. I just eyeballed it and that seemed to work out okay. So I popped this one up on some fun foam and added it to the front of the card, just the same as I did for the other one. And then I just added some black foam squares to the back of my sentiment and popped that over top of the flowers, as well as added some jewels. I'm going to list everything that I've used today over at the blog, and the link will be in the description below. And I'm so happy that you joined me here today. I've had a blast. There's always heaps of inspiration here, so don't forget to subscribe and to like this video. Bye.